can literally spend tens of thousands of dollars on amazing lenses, but I truly only rely on two of them, and I want to talk about these two lenses in this video and why I think they will cover like 95% of what photographers need. So let's dive right in. Hello my friends and welcome to this video again. So to make the answer quick, I'm talking about these two lenses. So this is a 70 to 200 millimeter telephoto lens, and this is a standard zoom lens, like for example a 24 to 70 millimeter. So that's it, thanks for watching. But if you want to know more about it, because there is a little bit more to it, then don't switch off right away and let's talk about that in depth. So like most people who are into photography, I always thought that I need a lens for every possible scenario to get the best result possible. I mean, you know what they say, the lens is more important than the camera. And while this is true, it also implies that you basically need super expensive lenses and a lot of them to get the best possible results. But I believe this is a little bit misleading because, as I said, I believe that with just two lenses you will get like 95% of things that you could do in photography without compromising the quality of your photos. And I think you can get these two lenses for around $1,000, and this is honestly a pretty good deal when we talk about high-end and nearly professional lenses. So over the years I had many different lenses. I sold a lot of them, a few I kept. So for example, I used the 135mm f1.8 prime lens, I used the 85mm f1.4 prime lens, I had a macro lens, I had the super wide angle lens. And all of this is great, but it also is a lot of weight. For example, I like to do landscape photography, and for that I have to walk many miles outdoors, and every gram counts. So if you have a lot of weight in your backpack, it is really uncomfortable. Plus a lot of these lenses were dead weight because I just didn't use them on location. Plus all of this gear created basically too much choice. It slowed me down to always change lenses and always try to adapt to the best possible lens for each situation. And sometimes I tried to switch lenses, and when I had switched the lenses, you know, the scene was over, the light was different, or the subject was simply gone. So over time I realized that I had to minimize my gear, and this is what I've done. So let's talk about lens number one now. So let's talk about the standard zoom lens now. I have one here. This is a 24 to 105 millimeter lens, an f4 lens. I made a video about that a few weeks ago, so feel free to check that out as well. But what I want to say about the standard zoom lenses, because they will not come as a surprise to you, is that they are so versatile. So I think we sometimes just don't give them enough credit, because you can do anything with it. On the 24mm hand, for example, you will have a very wide angle shot, which will cover most of your landscape things that you can do. On the other hand, you can zoom in, you have like the 50mm range where you can get amazing portraits, or even the 70mm range on most lenses where you are pretty much zoomed in, and this lens is even a little bit better because it will go to 105mm. So when I had to choose a lens that I had to use for the rest of my life, it would be something like that. So with a lens like that, you can react to any sorts of situations so well, and basically you will not miss out anything. You can put it on your camera in the morning and, you know, shoot the whole day with it without running into any problems, which is always a great choice. Hence the name standard zoom lens. And super important, and definitely would recommend going with somewhat of a lens like this. Plus, it will not break the bank, honestly. It always depends obviously on what lens you will choose, but if you have third-party manufacturers like for example Tamron or Sigma, you will find some pretty good deals on the used market as well. And even if you go to a manufacturer like Sony or Canon or Nikon, you will find pretty good deals when you look at, for example, f4 lens. So the next lens I want to talk about is, as I said in the beginning, this one here. This is a 70 to 200mm telephoto lens, and it is mostly associated with, for example, sports photography, event photography, maybe even wildlife photography, but most people forget about the capabilities in landscape photography and portrait photography as well. So this lens, again, it is super versatile for a lot of situations. So when I ask people what they think the best landscape photography lens is, most of them will basically say, it's a super wide angle lens, like for example a 16 to 35mm. And as I said, this is great for landscapes, but it will also like complicate a lot of things, because when you have a super wide angle lens in landscape photography, you will most likely have a lot of different things in your picture, which can look great, but you have to be super skilled to make a nice composition out of all these things in your photo. And great examples for this would be like, Nigel Denson. He is a super impressive landscape photographer. I love his work, but honestly, I'm not as skilled as him. And when you still want to get, nice compositions, for example, you want to make it yourself as easy as it gets. And you can do this by, for example, isolating subjects, isolating shapes, like for example, mountains. And what better way to do it than with a, telezoom lens, where you can really zoom in, crop in basically into a scene, make it yourself easier because you have less subjects in your photo that you can arrange, and still you will get this really immersive shots where you really feel basically the depth and the distance and the size of your subject in your picture, which is always great for landscape photography. Another area of photography where this lens is underrated is macro photography. Because in macro photography, at least with a macro lens, you have to get really close to your subject, which sometimes is not a big deal, but in other situations, when you, for example, want to photograph insects or small animals, then they will just fly away if you come too close to them. When you have a telezoom lens like this, you can step back a few steps and shoot it from a distance. And obviously, macro lenses, they have their place in the photography universe, and they are great for certain applications, and a 70 to 200 millimeter will not fully replace it. However, on modern cameras where you have so many megapixels, you can crop in pretty far later on. So you really get this macro feeling with your lens without actually having to buy a macro lens for like $1,000 or $2,000. So I think this lens, again, pretty versatile and always a great choice. So let's now talk about what lens you want to get when you buy one of these two lenses. And the first and most important choice basically is if you want to get an f2.8 aperture lens or an f4 aperture lens, because both of these lenses, they are available from a lot of different manufacturers. So I always used to think that the f2.8 aperture is absolutely necessary, but it comes with a few limitations. For example, most of the time the f2.8 aperture version is heavier and the f2.8 aperture version is much more expensive. And I'm not talking about a few $100 here. You can sometimes, basically double or even triple the price of the lens just to get one stop of wider aperture there. So is it really necessary? And I would say it will depend on the situations you want to use your lens for. For example, when you want to have very good low light performance and you want to, for example, do star photography, astrophotography in the nighttime, you most likely want to have an f2.8 aperture, maybe even wider than that. For example, when we go to prime lenses, you will find some wide angle prime lenses with f1.4 aperture, which are even better suited for nighttime and astrophotography. However, when we talk about portrait photography, I think it really doesn't matter that much, and let me explain you why. So part of my job is wedding photography, and when I shoot weddings and I do portrait and couple shootings there, I most of the time use an f4 aperture lens, and I even stop it down most of the time to like f5.6 or something like that, because I have more than one person in front of my camera, which means that they most of the time are not perfectly aligned to each other, which also means that I need more field of depth in my picture to have them both in focus, which is absolutely necessary. So I really cannot go with something like an f1.4 lens for that, because the focal plane will be so small that only one person, or not even the whole person, just the eyes of one person will be in focus while the other person is totally blurred out, and this is honestly not so great. However, if you have a single person in your shot, then f2.8 or even more like f1.4, f1.8, it will give you a creamier bokeh, which is most of the time associated with professional photography. However, I believe even with f4 or even f5.6, you will get creamy bokehs some of the time. It will not look exactly the same, but you will have a pretty blurred out background if your subject is separated enough. So if the background is really far away. So as I said, this is something that you have to decide for yourself and how you personally shoot and how much money you want to spend. But in my mind, when I had the idea for this video, I thought, can you get get a nearly professional bundle of lenses for less than $1,000? And the answer is yes, but only if you go with the f4 apertures. So in my mind, and we talk about Sony E-mount here, but similar is possible for Canon, Nikon as well. So my idea was to get a 24 to 70 millimeter Zeiss lens, the f4 version of that. It is a few years old, but still a pretty well built and honestly pretty good lens, I believe. And the second lens would be this one here. As I said, this is a 70 to 200 millimeter Sony lens, the f4 version, and this will cost you around $600 used, while the Zeiss lens will be around $400 if you are a little bit lucky. So you can get these two lenses for around $1,000 and you will get amazing results with that. So this is basically the conclusion for this video today. So this is basically it for today, and what I want to say here in the end is that I'm obviously aware that these two lenses, they cannot replace every single lens that is out there. There are special occasions and special needs where you have to get special lenses for your special field of photography, so it is absolutely worth investing in something like that when the time has come. However, as I said, 95% of photography is covered with these two lenses, so yeah, always keep that in mind and try to make the most with the equipment you have, I'd say. And now I'm really curious, what lenses do you have in your backpack all of the time? What are the most important lenses that everyone needs to own? So yeah, really interested in this. If you have watched this video so far, thank you so much for doing so. I have a lot of other videos about photography related topics over on my channel. Feel free to check them out. I've linked a few up here somewhere. So with that said, I hope I see you in next week's video. So see you then, and I wish you a great week. I wish you a great day,